Take picture. Pause. Face centered. Face centered. Speech off.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to chapters 5 and 6 of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. So glad you've joined us today, and now let's begin.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading Chapter 5 from The Hiding Place. Evenings at the Bayet, there was always company and music. Guests would bring their flutes or violins, and as each member of the family sang or played an instrument, we made quite an orchestra gathered around the upright piano in Tante Jan's front room. The only evenings when we did not make our own music was when there was a concert in town. We could not afford tickets, but there was a stage door at the side of the concert hall through which sounds came clearly. There in the alley outside this door, we and scores of other Harlem music lovers followed every note. Mama and Betsy were not strong enough to stand so many hours, but some of us from the Bayet would be there, in rain and snow and frost. And while from inside we would hear coughs and stirrings, there was never a rustle in the listeners at the door. Best of all was when there were concerts at the cathedral, because a relative was sexton there. Just inside his small private entrance, a wooden bench ran along the wall. Here we sat, our backs chilled by the ancient stone, our ears and hearts warmed by the music. The great golden organ was one that Mozart had played, and some of its notes seemed to come from heaven itself. Indeed, I was sure that heaven was like St. Bavo's and probably about the same size. Hell, I knew, was a hot place, so heaven must be like this cold, dank, holy building where smoke rose like incense from the foot warmers of the paying customers. In heaven, I fervently believed everybody had foot warmers. Even in the summer, the chill never left the marble, graved slabs on the floor. But when the organist touched the keys, we scarcely noticed. And when he played Bach, not at all. I was following Mama and Nolly up a dark, straight flight of stairs where cobwebs clutched at our hair and mice scuttled away ahead of us. The building was less than a block from the Bayet and probably a century newer. But here was no Tante Anna to wax and scrub. We were going to see one of the many poor families in the neighborhood whom Mama had adopted. It never occurred to any of us children that we ourselves were poor. The poor were people you took baskets to. Mama was always cooking up nourishing broths and porridges for forgotten old men and pale young mothers. On days, that is, when she herself was strong enough to stand at the stove. The night before, a baby had died, and with a basket of her own fresh bread, Mama was making the prescribed call on the family. She toiled painfully up the railless stairs, stopping often for breath. At the top, a door opened into a single room that was obviously cooking, eating, and sleeping quarters all at once. There were already many visitors, most of them standing for lack of chairs. Mama went at once to the young mother, but I stood frozen on the threshold. Just to the right of the door, so still in the homemade crib, was the baby. I stood, staring at the tiny, unmoving form with my heart thudding strangely against my ribs. Nolly, always braver than I, stretched out her hand and touched the ivory white cheek. I longed to do it too, but hung back afraid. For a while, curiosity and terror struggled in me. At last, I put one finger on the small, curled hand. It was cold. Cold as we walked back to the Bayet. Cold as I washed for supper. Cold even in the snug, gaslit dining room. Between me and each familiar face around the table crept those small, icy fingers. For all Tante Jan's talk about it, death had been only a word. Now I knew that it could really happen, if to the baby, then to Mama, to Father, to Betsy. Still shivering with that cold, I followed Nolly up to our room and crept into bed beside her. At last, we heard Father's footsteps winding up the stairs. It was the best moment in every day when he came up to tuck us in. We never fell asleep until he had arranged the blankets in his special way and laid his hand for a moment on each head. Then we tried not to move even a toe. But that night, as he stepped through the door, I burst into tears. "I need you. You can't die. You can't." Beside me on the bed, Nolly sat up. "We went to see Mrs. Hoog. Corey didn't eat her supper or anything." Father sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. "Corey, when you and I go to Amsterdam, when do I give you your ticket?" I sniffed a few times, considering this. "Why, just before we get on the train?" "Exactly. And our wise Father in heaven knows when we're going to need things too. Don't run out ahead of him, Corey. When the time comes that some of us will have to die, you will look into your heart and find the strength you need just in time." I first met Carol at one of the occasions for which Mama was famous. Afterward, I never could remember whether it was a birthday, a wedding anniversary, a new baby. Mama could make a party out of anything. Willem introduced him as a friend from Leiden, and he shook hands with us, one by one. I took that long, strong hand, looked up into those deep brown eyes, and fell irretrievably in love. As soon as everyone had coffee, I sat down just to gaze at him. He seemed quite unaware of me, but that was only natural. I was a child of 14, while he and Willem were already university men, sprouting straggly beards and breathing out cigar smoke with their conversation. It was enough, I felt, to be in the same room with Carol. As for being unnoticed, I was thoroughly used to that. Nolly was the one boys noticed, though, like so many pretty girls, she seemed not to care. When a boy asked for a lock of her hair, the standard method in those days of declaring passion, she would pull a few strands from the ancient gray carpet in our bedroom, tie them with a sentimental blue ribbon, and make me the messenger. The carpet was quite threadbare by now, the school full of broken hearts. I, on the other hand, fell in love with each boy in my class in turn, in a kind of hopeless, regular rhythm. But since I was not pretty and far too bashful to express my feelings, a whole generation of boys was growing up unaware of the girl in seat 32. Carol, though, I thought as I watched him spooning sugar into his cup, was different. I was going to love Carol forever. It was 2 years before I saw him again. That was the winter, 1908, that Nolly and I made a trip to the university at Leiden to pay Willem a visit. Willem's sparsely furnished room was on the 4th floor of a private home. He gathered both Nolly and me into a bear hug and then ran to the window. "Here," he said, taking in from the sill a cream bun he had been keeping cold there. "I bought this for you. You'd better eat it quick before my starving friends arrive." We sat on the edge of Willem's bed, gulping down the precious bun. I suspected that to buy it, Willem had to go without lunch. A second later, the door slammed open, and in burst 4 of his friends, tall, deep-voiced young men in coats with twice-turned collars and threadbare cuffs. Among them was Carol. I swallowed the last bite of cream bun, wiped my hands on the back of my skirt, and stood up. Willem introduced Nolly and me around, but when he came to Carol, Carol interrupted. "We know each other already." He bowed ever so slightly. "Do you remember? We met at a party at your home." I glanced from Carol to Nolly, but no. He was looking straight at me. Oh, my heart poured out a rapturous reply, but my mouth was still filled with the sticky remains of bun, and it never reached my lips. Soon the young men were seated at our feet on the floor, all talking eagerly and at once. Perched beside me on the bed, Nolly joined in as naturally as though visiting a university was an everyday event for us. For one thing, she looked the part. At 18, she was already in long skirts, while I was acutely conscious of the 6 inches of thick black schoolgirl stockings between the hem of my dress and the top of my shoes. Also, Nolly had things to talk about. The year before, she had started normal school. She didn't really want to be a teacher, but in those days, universities did not offer scholarships to girls, and normal schools were inexpensive. And so she chatted easily and knowledgeably about things of interest to students. This new theory of relativity by a man called Einstein, and whether Admiral Perry would really reach the North Pole. And you, Corey, will you go on to be a teacher too? Sitting on the floor at my feet, Carol was smiling at me. I felt a blush rise beneath my high collar. Next year, I mean. This is your final year in secondary school, isn't it? Yes. Why, I mean, no. I'll stay home with Mama and Tante Anna. It came out so short and flat. Why did I say so little when I wanted to say so very much? That spring, I finished school and took over the work of the household. It had always been planned that I would do this, but now there was an added reason. Tante Beth had tuberculosis. The disease was regarded as incurable. The only known treatment was rest at a sanatorium, and that was only for the rich. And so for many months, Tante Beth lay in her little closet of a room, coughing away her life. To keep down the risk of infection, only Tante Anna went in or out. Around the clock, she nursed her older sister, many nights getting no sleep at all. And so the cooking and washing and cleaning for the family fell to me. Well, I loved the work, and except for Tante Beth, would have been completely happy. But over everything lay her shadow, not only the illness, but her whole disgruntled and disappointed life. Often I would catch a glimpse inside when I handed in a tray or Tante Anna passed one out. There were their few, pathetic mementos of 30 years in other people's homes. Perfume bottles, empty many years, because well-bred families always gave the governors perfume for Christmas. Some faded pictures of children, who by now must have children and grandchildren of their own. Then the door would shut. But I would linger in that narrow passage under the eaves, yearning to say something, to heal something, wanting to love her better. I spoke once about my feelings to Mama. She, too, was more and more often in bed. Always before, when pain from the gallstones had got too bad, she'd had an operation. But a small stroke after the last one made further surgery impossible. And many days, making up a tray for Tante Beth, I carried one upstairs to Mama also. This time, when I brought in her lunch, she was writing letters. When Mama wasn't supplying the neighborhood with caps and baby dresses from her flying needles, she was composing cheery messages for shut-ins all over Harlem. The fact that she herself had been shut in much of her life never seemed to occur to her. "Here's a poor man, Corey," she cried as I came in, "who's been cooped up in a single room for 3 years. Oh, just think. Shut away from the sky." I glanced out Mama's single window at the brick wall 3 feet away. "Mama," I said as I set the tray on the bed and sat down beside it, "can't we do something for Tante Beth? I mean, isn't it sad that she has to spend her last days here where she hates it, instead of where she was so happy, the Walders or someplace?" Mama laid down her pen and looked at me. "Corey, Beth has been just as happy here with us, no more and no less than she was anywhere else." I stared at her, not understanding. Do you know when she started praising the Wallers so highly? The day she left them. As long as she was there, she had nothing but complaints. The Wallers couldn't compare with the Van Hooks, where she'd been before. But at the Van Hook, she'd actually been miserable. Happiness isn't something that depends on our surroundings, Corey. It's something we make inside ourselves. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corey ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
hiding place from Thursday, January 1st, 2026.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading Chapter 6 from The Hiding Place. Tante Bep's death affected her sisters in characteristic fashion. Mama and Tante Anna redoubled their cooking and sewing for the needy in the neighborhood, as though realizing how brief was anyone's lifetime of service. As for Tante Jans, her own particular specter moved very close. "My own sister," she would exclaim at odd moments of the day. "Why, it might as well have been me." A year or so after Tante Bep's death, a new doctor took over Dr. Blinker's house calls. The new man's name was John Van Veen, and with him came his young sister and nurse, Tine Van Veen. With him also came a new gadget for taking blood pressure. We had no idea what this meant, but everyone in the household submitted to having the strip of cloth wrapped around his arm and air pumped into it. Tante Jans, who loved medical paraphernalia of every kind, took a tremendous fancy to the new doctor, and from then on consulted him as often as her finances would permit. And so it was Dr. Van Veen, a couple of years later, who first discovered that Tante Jans had diabetes. In those days, this was a death sentence as surely as tuberculosis had been. For days, the household was numb with the shock of it. After all these years of fearing even the idea, here was the dread thing itself. Tante Jans went straight to bed on hearing the news. But inaction went poorly with her vigorous personality. And one morning, to everyone's surprise, she appeared for breakfast in the dining room precisely at 8:10 with the announcements that doctors were often wrong. "Oh, these tests and tubes," said Tante Jans, who believed in them implicitly. "What do they really prove?" And from then on, she threw herself more forcefully than ever into writing, speaking, forming clubs, and launching projects. Holland in 1914, like the rest of Europe, was mobilizing for war, and the streets of Haarlem were suddenly filled with young men in uniform. From her windows overlooking the street, Tante Jans watched them idling by, gazing aimlessly into the shop windows, most of them young, penniless, and lonesome. And she conceived the idea of a soldiers' center. It was a novel idea for its day, and Tante Jans threw all the passion of her nature into it. The horse-drawn trolley had recently been replaced with a big, new electric one. But it still squealed to a stop, spitting sparks from rails and wire when Tante Jans stood imperiously before the baye. She would sweep aboard, her long black skirts in one hand, in the other a list of the well-to-do ladies who were about to become patronesses of the new venture. Only those of us who knew her best were aware, beneath all the activity, of the monstrous fear which drove her on. And meanwhile, her disease posed financial problems. Each week, a fresh test had to be made to determine the sugar content of her blood. And this was a complicated and expensive process, requiring either Dr. Van Veen or his sister to come to the house. At last, Tine Van Veen taught me to run the weekly test myself. There were several steps involved, the most crucial being to heat the final compound to exactly the right temperature. It was hard to make the old coal-burning range in our dark kitchen do anything very precisely, but I finally learned how, and from then on, each Friday, mixed the chemicals and conducted the test myself. If the mixture remained clear when heated, all was well. It was only if it turned black that I was to notify Dr. Van Veen. It was that spring that Willem came home for his final holiday before ordination. He had graduated from the university 2 years before and was now in his last months at theological school. One warm evening during his visit, we were all sitting around the dining room table. Father, with 30 watches spread out before him, was marking in a little notebook in his precise, beautiful script, 2 seconds lost, 5 seconds gained, while Willem read aloud from a history of the Dutch Reformation. All at once, the bell in the alley rang. Outside the dining room window, a mirror faced the alley door so that we could see who was there before going down to open it. I glanced into it and sprang up from the table. "Corey," said Betsy reprovingly, "your skirt." I could never remember that I was wearing long skirts now, and Betsy spent many evenings mending the rips I put in them when I moved too fast. Now I took all 5 steps in a bound, for at the door, a bouquet of daffodils in her hands, was Tyne Van Veen. Whether it was the soft spring night that put it in my mind, or Willem's dramatic, pulpit-trained voice, I suddenly knew that the meeting of these two people had to be a very special moment. "For your mother, Corey," Tyne said, holding out the flowers as I opened the door. "I hope she's—" "Oh, no. You carry the flowers. You look beautiful with them." And without even taking her coat, I pushed the startled girl up the stairs ahead of me. I prodded her through the dining room door, almost treading on her heels to see Willem's reaction. I knew exactly how it would be. My life was lived just then in romantic novels. I borrowed them from the library in English, Dutch, and German, often reading ones I liked in all 3 languages. And I had played this scene where hero meets heroine 1,000 times. Willem rose slowly to his feet, his eyes never leaving Tyne's. Father stood up too. "Miss Van Veen," Father said in his old-fashioned manner, "allow me to present to you our son, Willem. Willem, this is the young lady of whose talent and kindness you have heard us speak." I doubt if either one heard the introduction. They were staring at each other as though there were not another soul in the room or in the world. Willem and Tyne were married 2 months after his ordination. During all the weeks of getting ready, one thought stood out in my mind. Carol will be there. The wedding day dawned cool and sparkling. My eyes picked Carol immediately from the crowd in front of the church, dressed in top hat and tails as were all the male guests, but incomparably the handsomest there. As for me, I felt that a transformation had taken place since he had seen me last. The difference between my 21 years and his 26 was not, after all, as big as it had once been. But more than that, I felt, no, not beautiful. Even on such a romantic day as this, I could not persuade myself of that. I knew that my jaw was too square, my legs too long, my hands too large. But I earnestly believed, and all the books agreed, that I would look beautiful to the man who loved me. Betsy had done my hair that morning, laboring for an hour with the curling iron until it was piled high on my head, and so far, for a wonder, it had stayed. She'd made my silk dress, too, as she'd made one for each of the women in the family, working by lamplight in the evenings, because the shop was open 6 days a week, and she would not sew on Sundays. Now, looking around me, I decided that our homemade outfits were as stylish as any there. Nobody would guess, I thought, as the gentle press toward the door began, that Father had given up his cigars and Tante Jan's the coal fire in her rooms in order to buy the silk that swished so elegantly with us now. "Corey?" In front of me stood Carol, tall black hat in his hands, his eyes searching my face as though he were not quite sure. "Yes, it's me," I said, laughing up at him. "It's me, Carol, and it's you, and it's the moment I've been dreaming of." "But you're so grown up." "Forgive me, Corey, of course you are. It's just that I've always thought of you as the little girl with the enormous blue eyes." He stared at me a little longer and then added softly, "And now, the little girl is a lady, and a lovely one." Suddenly, the organ music swelling from the open door was for us. The arm he offered me was the moon, and my gloved hand resting upon it was the only thing that kept me from soaring right over the peaked rooftops of Harlem. It was a windy, rainy Friday morning in January, when my eyes told me what at first my brain refused to grasp. The liquid In the glass beaker on the kitchen stove was a muddy, sullen black. I leaned against the old wooden sink and shut my eyes. Please, God, let me have made a mistake. I went over in my mind the different steps, looked at the vials of chemicals, the measuring spoons. No, all just the same as I'd always done. It was this wretched room then. It was always dark in this little cupboard of a kitchen. With the potholder, I snatched up the beaker and ran to the window in the dining room. Black. Black as fear itself. Still clutching the beaker, I pounded down the 5 steps and through the rear door of the shop. Father, his jeweler's glass in his eye, was bent over the shoulder of the newest apprentice, deftly selecting an infinitesimal part from the array before them on the workbench. I looked through the glass in the door to the shop, but Betsy, behind her little cashier's desk, was talking to a customer. Not a customer, I corrected myself, a nuisance. I knew the woman. She came here for advice on watches, and then bought them at that new place, Kahn's, across the street. Neither Father nor Betsy seemed to care that this was happening more and more. As the woman left, I burst through the door with the telltale beaker. Betsy! Oh, Betsy, it's Black! How are we going to tell her? What are we going to do? Betsy came swiftly from behind the desk and put her arms around me. Behind me, Father came into the shop. His eyes traveled from the beaker to Betsy to me. And you did it exactly right, Corey, in every detail? I'm afraid so, Father. And I am sure of it, my dear, but we must have the doctor's verdict, too. I'll take it at once. And so I poured the ugly liquid into a small bottle and ran with it over the slippery, rain-washed streets of Harlem. There was a new nurse at Dr. Van Veen's, and I spent a miserable, silent half-hour in the waiting room. At last, his patient left, and Dr. Van Veen took the bottle into a small laboratory. There is no mistake, Corey. Your aunt has 3 weeks at the very most. We held a family conference in the watch shop when I got back. Mama, Tante Anna, Father, Betsy, and me. Nolly did not get home from her teaching job until evening. We agreed that Tante Jans must know at once. We will tell her together, Father decided, though I will speak the necessary words. And perhaps she will take heart from all she has accomplished. She puts great store on accomplishment, Jans does, and who knows but that she is right. And so the little procession filed up the steps to Tante Jan's room. Come in and close the door before I catch my death of drafts. She was sitting at her round mahogany table, working on yet another appeal for her soldier center. As she saw the number of people entering the room, she laid down her pen. She looked from one face to another until she came to mine and gave a little gasp of comprehension. This was Friday morning, and I had not yet come up with the results of the test. My dear sister-in-law, there is a joyous journey which each of God's children sooner or later sets out on. And Jans, some must go to their father empty-handed, but you will run to him with hands full. All your clubs, Tante Anna ventured. Your writings, Mama added. The funds you've raised, said Betsy. Your talks, I began, but all our well-meant words were useless. In front of us, the proud face crumpled. Tante Jans put her hands over her eyes and began to cry. Empty. Empty. How can we bring anything to God? What does he care for our little tricks and trinkets? And then, as we listened in disbelief, she lowered her hands and with tears still coursing down her face whispered, Dear Jesus, I thank you that we must come with empty hands. I thank you that you have done all on the cross, and that all we need in life or death is to be sure of this. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading from The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
And so we conclude chapters, what did I say? 5 and 6 of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. And this was a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network. We appreciate them allowing us to share. And you can find them at bbnradio.org. Their phone number is 1-800-888-7077. Again, that's 1-800-888-7077. Till next time, thank you for listening, and God bless. Goodbye.
Speech on. Frame rate. Video frame camera. Stop recording video. Take pic. Pause. Face near. Face near. Pause. Take picture. Stop recording video.